The words hung in the air like a lightning bolt about to strike. "Maybe you should go back where you came from," Sarah Mitchell said, her voice cutting through the packed congressional hearing room. Every camera turned, every breath held. Congresswoman Diana Santos, representing California's 34th District, slowly stood up from her chair. What happened in the next 30 seconds would shake the halls of Congress and ignite a firestorm across America that's still burning today. This wasn't just another political disagreement. This was the moment a rising conservative star thought she could silence one of Congress's most fearless voices. But Diana Santos had been waiting her whole life for this moment, and her response didn't just stun everyone in that room. It changed everything. The hearing room was packed, C-SPAN cameras rolling, social media ready to explode. Nobody knew they were about to witness political history in the making. Sarah Mitchell walked into that hearing room like she owned the place. At just 28 years old, she'd already made a name for herself as one of the most aggressive conservative voices in politics. Former campaign strategist turned political commentator, Mitchell had built her brand on saying exactly what others were thinking but were too afraid to voice. She'd been invited to testify about election integrity, a topic she'd been hammering for months on every conservative platform that would have her. With her blonde hair perfectly styled and her navy blue suit as crisp as her talking points, Mitchell looked every inch the polished political operative she'd become. But there was something different about her energy that day. Maybe it was the pressure of testifying before Congress, or maybe she felt like this was her moment to make a statement that would cement her place in conservative politics forever. 43-year-old Diana Santos was a different breed entirely. The daughter of immigrants from El Salvador, she had earned her law degree, built a successful civil rights practice, and fought her way to Congress representing one of the most diverse districts in America. She wasn't some career politician who'd grown up in Washington's bubble. She was a civil rights attorney who'd spent years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Santos had been making waves since day one in Congress. When other Democrats played it safe, she spoke truth to power. When Republicans tried to intimidate freshman members, she stood her ground. Her questioning during committee hearings had already become legendary among political junkies who watched C-SPAN for entertainment. But this hearing was different. As a member of the House Judiciary Committee, Santos had been preparing for weeks to question witnesses about voting rights and election security. She had files full of research, constitutional law at her fingertips, and zero intention of letting anyone spread misinformation without a fight. The hearing had been going for about 2 hours when Congresswoman Santos got her turn to question the witnesses. The room was already thick with partisan tension, but the exchanges had been relatively civil. The usual Washington theater where everyone reads from their scripts. That all started to shift when Santos began her questioning. She didn't start with gentle warm-up questions. She went straight for the jugular. "Miss Mitchell," Santos began, her voice steady but sharp, "you've testified today about election integrity, but I want to ask you about something specific. In your previous statements, you've claimed that certain voting practices common in urban areas are fraudulent. Can you provide evidence for these claims?" Mitchell straightened in her chair. This wasn't the question she prepared for. "Congresswoman, I think what I've said is very clear. We need to ensure that every legal vote counts, and every illegal vote doesn't." "That's not what I asked." Santos shot back immediately. "I asked for evidence. You've made specific claims about voting patterns in cities like Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, cities that happen to have large African-American populations. Do you have evidence that voting in these cities is fraudulent?" The room got quieter. Other committee members started paying closer attention. Mitchell's media training kicked in. "Congresswoman, I think you're trying to make this about race when it's really about election security." "Miss Mitchell, with respect, you don't get to tell me what I'm making this about," Santos replied, her voice rising slightly. "I'm a civil rights attorney. I've studied voting rights law for years, and what you're describing, questioning the legitimacy of votes in predominantly black cities without evidence, has a very specific history in this country." Republican committee members started shifting uncomfortably. The ranking Republican member tried to interrupt, but Santos cut him off. "This is substantive. Miss Mitchell, yes or no? Do you have evidence that voting in Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta is more fraudulent than voting in predominantly white suburban areas? Mitchell was getting flustered. Congresswoman, I think your question is loaded and unfair. I've never said anything about race. You're the one bringing race into this. I'm bringing race into this. Santos's eyebrows shot up. Miss Mitchell, you literally tweeted last month that urban voting patterns raise serious questions. What did you mean by urban? The room was getting tenser by the second. Congressional staff were starting to whisper. Reporters were frantically typing notes. Mitchell was clearly getting angry. Congresswoman, I think you're being deliberately obtuse. Urban areas have different voting patterns. That's just a fact. Different how? Santos pressed. More fraudulent? Less legitimate? What exactly are you implying about how urban Americans, who are disproportionately black and brown, exercise their right to vote? The committee chairman tried to regain control, but Santos wasn't backing down. She's not answering the questions. She's deflecting. Miss Mitchell, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have any evidence that voting in predominantly black cities is more fraudulent than voting anywhere else in America? Mitchell's face was starting to flush. Congresswoman, I think your line of questioning is inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Santos's voice rose, is coming before Congress and making baseless claims about election fraud that just happen to target communities of color. What's inappropriate is undermining American democracy without evidence. The tension was becoming unbearable. Mitchell was clearly losing her composure. She looked around the room, maybe hoping for help from Republican committee members, but they seemed frozen. Congresswoman, Mitchell said, her voice now openly hostile, I don't think you understand what election integrity means. Maybe you should focus on representing your own district instead of grandstanding about issues you clearly don't understand. The room went dead silent. Everyone realized that Mitchell had just crossed a line. Santos leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. Excuse me? Did you just tell a sitting member of Congress that she doesn't understand the issues she's questioning you about? I think some members of Congress are more interested in political theater than actual solutions. Mitchell shot back, her voice getting louder. Santos sat back in her chair for a moment, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Everyone in the room who knew her recognized that look. It was the same expression she wore in court just before she destroyed an opposing argument. Miss Mitchell, she said, her voice now dangerously calm, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. Are you suggesting that I, as an elected representative of over 760,000 Americans, don't have the right or the intelligence to question your testimony about voting rights? The room was holding its breath. Cameras were zooming in. Social media was about to explode, and Sarah Mitchell was about to make the biggest mistake of her political career. Mitchell looked around the room one more time. Her face was flushed, her composure completely gone. Instead of backing down, she decided to go nuclear. She leaned into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly through the packed hearing room. Congresswoman Santos, maybe if you spent less time attacking people who are trying to help America and more time focusing on your own community's problems, we'd all be better off. And honestly, maybe you should go back where you came from and fix those issues before lecturing the rest of us about democracy. The words hit the room like a physical force. Gasps echoed from the gallery. Congressional staff froze mid-movement. The Republican committee chairman's face went pale. For exactly 3 seconds, the hearing room was completely silent. Those 3 seconds felt like an eternity as everyone processed what had just happened. Santos took a deep breath, and when she looked up, her eyes were blazing with a fire that everyone in that room could feel. When she spoke, her voice was quiet at first, but it carried the weight of history. Excuse me, she said so softly that everyone had to strain to hear. Did you just tell me to go back where I came from? Mitchell seemed to realize what she'd just said, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. I said you should focus on your own community's issues instead of... No, Santos interrupted, her voice now growing stronger. You said I should go back where I came from. Let me be very clear about something, Miss Mitchell. I am exactly where I came from. She stood up slowly, commanding the attention of every person in the room. I was born in Los Angeles, raised in California, educated at UCLA, and I represent the great state of California in the United States Congress. This is where I came from, Miss Mitchell. This is my country. These are my people, and this is my house." The gallery started to stir, but Santos wasn't done. "But let me tell you where else I came from. I came from parents who fled civil war in El Salvador, who came to this country with nothing but hope and a belief in the American dream. I came from a father who worked 3 jobs to put me through college, who never stopped believing that his daughter could serve in the halls of Congress. I came from a mother who cleaned office buildings at night, so I could have textbooks during the day." Republican committee members were looking anywhere but at the cameras. The room was completely transfixed. I came from ancestors who built this country with their labor, who fought in every American war, who believed in democracy even when democracy didn't believe in them. "Go back where you came from" is what they told the Irish when they came here fleeing famine. It's what they told the Italians, the Jews, the Chinese. It's what every generation of Americans who felt threatened by newcomers has said to the next wave of people seeking the American dream. She looked directly at Mitchell, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "But here's what you don't understand, Miss Mitchell. We didn't go back. We stayed. We worked. We studied. We served. We ran for office. We got elected. And now we sit in the United States Congress, asking tough questions of people who come before us making claims without evidence." The room was completely silent, except for the clicking of keyboards and cameras. "Since you seem confused about how this works," Santos continued, "let me give you a quick civics lesson. I was elected by over 200,000 voters in California's 34th Congressional District. They sent me here to represent their interests, to ask tough questions, and to hold people accountable when they come before Congress making claims that could undermine our democracy." She gestured around the hearing room. "This is the people's house, Miss Mitchell. I don't need your permission to be here. I don't need your approval to ask questions. And I certainly don't need career advice from someone who's never been elected to anything." Santos pulled out a thick folder from her briefing materials. "Because unlike you, Miss Mitchell, I came prepared with actual facts." She opened the folder and began reading. In 2020, Detroit had a recount that confirmed the original results. Philadelphia's election was certified by Republican state officials. Atlanta's votes were counted 3 times. Every single audit confirmed the results. She looked up at Mitchell. "But you didn't mention any of that in your testimony, did you? You just repeated the same baseless claims that have been debunked by dozens of courts." Santos's voice softened slightly, but the steel was still there. "You know what's really sad about this, Miss Mitchell? You're young. You're smart. You could be using your platform to actually help solve problems. Instead, you're here spreading lies that undermine people's faith in democracy and telling elected officials to go back where they came from." She shook her head. "My constituents didn't send me here to be polite to people who attack our democracy. They sent me here to fight for them. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." The room erupted. Democratic committee members started applauding. The gallery buzzed with energy. Republican members looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. Santos gathered her papers, looked directly into the C-SPAN camera, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back." Before the hearing had even ended, social media was on fire. The clip was being shared thousands of times per minute. Diana Santos was trending within 10 minutes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Sarah Mitchell was trying to walk back her comments, but it was too late. The video was everywhere, and her words were clear. There was no way to spin "go back where you came from" as anything other than what it was. For Santos, it established her as a national figure and a powerful voice for her party. The incident became a rallying cry for Democratic voter registration efforts and a template for how to respond to racist attacks with dignity and strength. Political historians would later note that the confrontation crystallized the ongoing tensions in American politics around race and representation. Santos's response became a source of inspiration for millions of Americans who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the dust settled, one thing remained clear. Diana Santos had not just defended herself that day. She had defended the idea that America belongs to all Americans, regardless of their race, their background, or where their ancestors came from. And in doing so, she had created one of the most powerful political moments of her generation.